Today on the Self Smarter podcast.
I think it's the leader in her that has really kept this super fandom of mine alive, even when her music was going through ebbs and flows. And so I think that might be a little bit of a surprise for folks is to know that particular aspect. So, and again, that's what so if you're listening and you're thinking this podcast is going to be about Dolly Parton and her music, it's actually going to be what the title says. We're going to talk about her leadership and the things that I've certainly learned and that I hope others can learn from her as well. Hi, we're Danelle and Megan, the hosts of this conversation-centric podcast for leaders seeking to be better every day. Whether you choose to be a leader in the workplace, at home, or in your community, we believe the most effective leaders are equipped to not only be self-starters, but self-smarter.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, so we're diving in head first. You're so excited.
I am. I'm giddy.
It's going to be fun.
This
is going to be a fun one and very special episode today. Hello, and welcome to the Self Smarter listeners. I'm Megan, and this is my trusty co-host, Danelle.
Hello.
And if you listened to our last podcast, we talked about humble leaders, and I asked you a question. Mm-hmm. I asked you to name one humble leader that just would pop off the top of your head. And who did you say?
Dolly Parton.
You did. Yes. And then we promised our listeners that we were going to do an episode about Dolly and her leadership lessons.
Yes.
So this is it. This is the big day. It's happening. You've been asking for it forever. And so here we go.
Well, it was my first idea for an episode.
I've got an idea for a whole podcast. It's Let's Talk About Dolly.
Yes.
Which actually probably would be very successful.
Well, there are several.
I'm sure.
We'll put those in the footnotes.
Maybe they'll make us a guest.
Maybe.
Dolly Parton fans and other podcasts, please invite us to your podcast.
Exactly.
This one really wants to talk about Dolly Parton. So let's get into it. As long as I've known you, you have been a Dolly Parton fan. You're really a super fan.
Yeah, I would. I think most people would characterize me as that. Yes,
I think so. And this has been for a long time. So, what's your earliest memory of Dolly?
Oh wow. Well, I was born in '72, and that matters. And we'll talk a little bit about her timeline for those who just for context. But I was born in '72, so at that time, she was still performing on the Porter Wagoner show. Okay, and I don't remember. I do remember being on Saturday nights with my grandparents, and that's back when they would have these amazing music shows. And I do remember Dolly and Porter, but I'm not sure if it was like the show in syndication because she left that show in '74. So I would have been too young to remember, but I definitely remember watching the Grand Ole Opry and her performing there, and definitely Hee Haw. She performed a lot on Hee Haw. And I do remember her in Porter, so maybe that show was coming or being replayed on those particular evenings. But those are my earliest memories, is watching with my grandparents, my dad's parents, watching those shows and knowing her as a singer. And then I know for sure that in 1980, so I would have been 8 years old, the movie 9 to 5 came out. And growing up in the small town that I grew up in, the nearest town where we would go to the grocery store and things had a one show music theater. And I remember going and watching 9 to 5 and sitting literally on the front row with my neck. I must have had a crick in my neck. But that's when I fell in love with Dolly Parton, I think for a lot of reasons, because she was portrayed as not necessarily as a singer in that show, but I remember having these feelings of just admiration and how incredibly talented she was. And so I guess, from 8 years old, that's when I became a super fan, I'd say, for sure.
That's a young age to be a super fan and to be, everybody knows. So you just turned 50. So that's a long time to be so devoted. And you are.
Yes.
You're very devoted. And really your admiration goes beyond just her music.
Yeah, I think most people think that it's mostly about the music, and it should be. She's one of our national treasures when it comes to songwriter singers. And I'm putting that in particular order because I know that's how Dolly Parton sees herself. I mean, she's written over 3,000 songs, her largest accolades and markers of success have come from her songwriting.
Amazing.
Relative to her music. But the thing that's kept me, literally how she's guiding me throughout, the 40 plus years, is that it's how she shows up in the world and how she navigated the decades and the different challenges that she was faced, that when they were made public, I would just garner this admiration. And then over time, watching her become the businesswoman that she is today, and thus the leader and a person of such great faith, but then also someone who is so insistent on seeing people where they are and who they are. So this person who can show up with, again, such faith, but then diverse ideas on things, and to be someone who's so empathetic in so many ways. I think it's the leader in her that has really kept this super fandom of mine alive, even when her music was going through ebbs and flows. And so I think that might be a little bit of a surprise for folks, is to know that particular aspect. So, and again, that's what so if you're listening and you're thinking this podcast is going to be about Dolly Parton and her music, it's actually going to be what the title says. We're going to talk about her leadership and the things that I've certainly learned and that I hope others can learn from her as well. And so that's what we're going to celebrate today.
I think it's important too to start from her, like her life. I know you know this. She's literally like a walking encyclopedia or Wikipedia about Dolly Parton. It's amazing. In fact, we were doing some research and I was literally reading from the Library of Congress about Dolly Parton, and Danelle is not reading, but like just saying the things, and it's literally what's written. I was like, have you memorized this in the Library of Congress? She's like, no, I just know these things. So would love for you to just give everybody a little bit of background on Dolly's life and her journey as a leader.
Okay, well, she's 76, so we might be here for a minute, which is just incredible to think that, and for those of you listening, whether you're a fan or a super fan or someone, you know who Dolly Parton is, and to think that, and you're not unhearing her about her at this stage, but she is 76 years old. So I find that fascinating. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But for those of you who don't know the story, and I'm going to kind of breeze through it because it's well documented, well written by herself and many, many, many others.
And the Library of Congress.
Yeah, in fact, Library of Congress. But growing up, she was the fourth of 12 children. She grew up super poor in the Appalachian Mountains in a little town called Pigeon Forge. And she, again, dirt poor and shared beds. And I don't remember how many rooms they had in their house, but not a lot. Not enough for, that'd be for 14 if you count the parents. But always a songbird. She remembers writing her first song at the age of 5. And that little song was called it's Little Tiny Tassel Top. It's a little bit of a mouthful. But she remembers writing that song at 5 years old. And I think that says a lot in itself, that she was, this gift that was God-given was so innate in her at such a young age, and gratefully, shepherded by her parents and her family. And so her uncle took her to Nashville at age 18, and that was in 1964. And then took her in age 18, and then in 1964 she became the quote unquote girl singer, which is just crazy that that's what she was called, on the Porter Wagner show. And she said, I'm going to be committed to being the girl singer on this show, and she quickly became the more popular one, which became their first rub between her and Porter. And but she stayed there. She said, I'm going to be here for 5 years, and she ended up staying for 7. And when she famously made the call to go out on her own, and his resistance to that decision, that's when she was able to pen her most famous song, I Will Always Love You. And she wrote that to express her gratitude first and foremost to him for those 7 years, even in the wake of his frustration and fury and, quite frankly, lawsuits. And it's, if you listen to the lyrics of the song, it's about her also moving on. And if you know this about her now, you can sense her plea for freedom and what is easily seen, especially Whitney's version, as just being a traditional love song. So there's a lot of layers to it, which just makes that song even more fascinating. And I can talk more about that later. She found great success as a solo artist right off the bat. So the late 60s, 70s, and 80s, that was literally her chart-topping music time of her career. And what was interesting is that, if Leaving the Porter Wagoner Show was like her first big leadership decision, and I'm sure she had some, leading to her going to Nashville, obviously. But if Leaving the Porter Wagoner Show at the top of their game together, I mean, they had #1 charts on the hits, so leaving that was her first challenge. Once her music, she was having great success on the country chart, she wanted to expand her audience and her music to a broader audience. So she wrote these, what at the time were considered pop disco songs.
Wait. Wait.
Seriously.
Dolly did disco?
Okay, so here are the two songs that country radio and country music, the machine, determined as disco is Here You Come Again and Two Doors Down. Which
no.
Far cry.
Love those songs.
Love those songs.
Not
but
disco.
Not the Bee Gees disco.
No.
But what was happening is there were versions of those songs that had more of a dance overlay to them. And so, but she was shunned. She was shunned in Nashville because of putting out these records and wanting to expand.
She disrupted.
She did. And what's interesting is that her music in itself, the songs that she was putting out in the 60s and the 70s and even into the 80s was already a disruption. She was talking about mental illness. She was talking about suicide. She was talking about these sad-ass stories that was the life that she knew where she grew up, and she wasn't afraid to tell those stories. And I think one of the best interviews, and I'm just going to go ahead and get this out of the way because I'm going to mention Brene Brown in every episode that we have on this podcast, but I think one of the best interviews about Dolly Parton's leadership journey is on the Dare to Lead podcast, where she and her and Brene talk about those sad songs and why she did it. And I love it because it shaped Brene. And Brene was like, you were the original person that brought empathy, and you gave shame a name by writing these songs. And some of these songs wouldn't even be played on radio. And in fact, in Brene's home, she couldn't listen to all of the Dolly Parton albums because of some of these songs. Oh. So it's just an interesting listen. Again, we'll put the link in the show notes on the website, but it's just fascinating to think about, okay, I'm going to leave this successful post on this show, and now I'm going to write music and songs that are controversial. Yeah. And I'm going to show up with a big old wig and almost a cartoon-like character and be literally the target of a lot of ridicule. Yeah. And what was interesting about that is, and we'll talk about it in her leadership lessons, but, she quickly turned the dial on that, which is also just amazing. And so then in 80s kind of marked her mark. As I mentioned earlier, 9 to 5 came out in 1980, which was the first movie she was ever in. And then from there led her into other movies, Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, et cetera, et cetera. So Still Magnolia is one of the greatest of all times. And I think we could probably do a whole episode just on Still Magnolias. Yeah, we could. And so she was leaning into movies as well. And then we get into the 90s, and that's when her chart-topping kind of radio success started to dry up. Okay, so now enter another challenging time in her career because radio wasn't playing her music. And so Dolly left the big record labels and went to several independents, and then in true Dolly Parton style, started her own record label. And what she's talked about, and by doing that, is I can't quit writing songs and creating music. Mm-hmm. I can't. It's who I am. She talks to Brene about doing it every single day. And I mean, she's written over 3,000 songs. Some of her, again, she is a songwriter. And so she was like, I can't just quit doing what I was born to do because radio is not seeing it as successful or what people want to hear. And so I think the 90s are just a particularly interesting time in her career because she made that decision. And then this is also when she really started leaning into philanthropy. And she started to realize that my success now can be not just something that people enjoy, but can make a huge difference. And that's when she started in 95, I think it was. She started, that's when she bought the theme park. Or no, I think that was earlier, but in the 90s, she bought a rundown theme park that is now widely known and one of the most successful theme parks there is, Dollywood. And she bought that theme park to give the people where she grew up job opportunities. And now those job opportunities have turned into full paid tuition for their education and et cetera. The list goes on and on about how her businesses have, while they're for-profit businesses, she's using them to strengthen economies around it. She also, in the 90s, started Imagination Library. And I know you all know that very well here because the team, in many occasions, birthday gifts, Christmas gifts, has made donations to the Imagination Library because it means a lot to me, being a super fan of Dolly Parton's. But she basically started the Imagination Library because her dad could not read or write. And he was always very ashamed of that. And she believed in illiteracy shouldn't be a barrier to people, but where she was from, it was common. And so the Imagination Library started in the county she grew up in, Sevierville County, and she committed to making sure that every child born in that county, from the month they were born until 5 years old, they would receive a book, a book that had been vetted, and they would receive a book and that they would learn to read. Now this has moved on. I mean, again, just go to the website. You can see all the stats, but it's in multiple countries. I mean, I think they just went over their 2 million have given away to over 2 million books. There's an incredible amount of children being served through this program on a worldwide basis. It's just significant. Amazing. And what was beautiful about it too is that her dad was alive to see not only the start of it, but part of its success early in the early days. So I know that was a big deal for her. And then when you think about the last 20 years, so the 2000s, again, starting in the 2000s, she really started to expand even further her business prowess. And I know that for a fact, her business advisors told her not to buy Dollywood. And now you think about its success. And she's definitely had some failures along the way, some things that she's invested in that hasn't worked, but she's listened to herself and she continues to find ways to use her talents in versatile ways. And so it now not only she hasn't been in a movie in a minute, but she's lent her likeness to a movie in terms of being a key actor in a movie. It's been a minute, but she's lent her likeness and she has production companies. So she creates movies and she creates made for television shows and she's an author. And if you're watching on YouTube, we have some props here today that are very special to me. And so and then I think one of her greatest gifts to us in terms of books is the book called Dolly Parton, The Song Teller. And she literally talks about 175 of her songs. She talks about the origin of the lyrics. And it's a beautiful, incredible coffee table book, but just a gift if you want to know where songs come from and where they came from out of her heart and soul. So I think that is just phenomenal. Some other things that I think, just to give our listeners some context, is if you think about it, she has had chart-topping singles every decade since the 60s. Even
That's amazing.
They've been on the charts. I said topping, but they've been on the charts, whether, they made it to number 45, it doesn't matter. And now that she's producing her own music, but
is there anybody else?
Do what?
Is anybody else that has?
You tell me. I don't know of anyone. And what's interesting is, I don't know that we'll ever see that again. No. And I don't, in our lifetimes, I hope so, but I don't know. But to think that, and then she's had, 44 career top 10 country albums, 110 chart toppers. I think that's the number, and 10 Grammys, 49 nominations. She's won Tonys for her musical. I know she has a musical about her life and the making. So she's not going to stop, and she's going to continue, and she'll talk about it. She talks about it on a recent podcast with Adam Grant, which we'll put a link in the show notes with. She talks about it with Brene. She's not going to stop. She's like, what would I do? Because what I'm doing is so fulfilling to me. And so when I think about leadership and leaning into the self-awareness of the gift that you have, the contribution that you can make, and finding ways to be focused on that enough to also be versatile and expand into those areas. I mean, from a leadership perspective, and she says it's a gift. She's been given a gift.
She has.
And she's done something with it. It's not wasted. And I use that in times of great triumph. I think about Dolly Parton, and definitely through a lot of the challenges I've been through as a leader and just a person and a human, I've looked to her as a beacon of inspiration. And I think there's what would Dolly do? Plenty of people have given me shirts, coffee mugs, you name it, with that on there, but it's the truth. Mm-hmm. It's an easy thing to think about is, what would Dolly do if you need a little bit of guidance in a particular scenario? So I know that's a lot for our listeners to take in, but
yeah, no, it certainly helps. Yeah. But I think, relative to leadership, and you just touched on it a little bit, because what would Dolly do? I mean, quite frankly, I think about that now. Mm-hmm. Like, if I'm having a lighter heart, or I'm trying to make something come across very clearly or plainly for people, how do I do that? And so, and you have taught me that. So, but let's talk about some of those lessons that you have learned from Dolly Parton over the years.
Yeah. Again, I think before we start is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk particular about Dolly Parton is because I have learned a lot, and I do think these lessons apply to everyone, no matter where you are in your journey, male, female. Right. Again, age, it really doesn't matter. And because she's relatable, and she is the epitome of self-smarter.
Yeah, she is.
She really is. And if I think about this podcast and what we're trying to elevate through our own journey and eventually others, so that's Dolly's somebody we're highlighting. I want to highlight other leaders that we feel have done an amazing job in this way. And then certainly through our guests that we'll soon be having on our podcast, we want to make sure that we're providing our listeners with examples that are real and relatable. So with that, I think about lessons, and this is not in any particular order, but just things that have spoke to me. They're not even headlines that I've allowed the team to edit, which they edit most everything that I do. So, Jordan, brace yourself, because you haven't necessarily seen this list, because Megan allowed me to come up with it on my own. I'm a big girl now. But, I would say that your circumstance, to start off, is that your circumstance is not a sentence. And that doesn't just speak to someone who grew up as she did in poverty, and with a lot of opportunity to be stuck there, right? But I think a lot of us have some version of a humble aspect to our beginning, and that could be anything from, again, income issues to divorce to you fill in the blank. Most people have some challenge along the way, and in our circumstance, shouldn't be a sentence. And for Dolly, first and foremost, growing up in a challenging environment, going out on her own and risking being completely rejected. I think her circumstance, because she was successful with the Porter Wagner show, that was what she wanted to do forever and ever. Amen.
Right.
And so it wasn't a sentence because she was successful. So I'm trying to give an example of something that was a negative. Again, she grew up with so much love and music and faith, but they were dirt poor, and that was a challenge. Being successful right out of the gate, going to Nashville, but with being on the girl singer on a show, being rejected by country radio, which I mentioned, ridiculed and objectified for her weight quite frankly, her boobs. I mean, let's call a spade a spade.
Right.
But being objectified by that, she's not let these circumstances keep her down. She's learned how to navigate each one of those to her benefit. And so I would say that, again, that's lesson number one. And I paid attention to that growing up in the small town that I was in. And
You related.
I related. And she was relatable to me always. And she still is today. And I think that's, again, part of her incredible gift. Know your worth and be willing to make tough decisions. And she's had to do it so many times. And I've mentioned a few, but one of my favorites is Dolly, as I said, penned I Will Always Love You in 1974. And in that time, that song went to number one on the country charts. And she had other number one hits, but they were alongside Porter. I don't know if this was her first number one single as a solo artist, but it's one of the first. So Elvis comes a-calling. So Elvis's manager. So think, this is 1974. Elvis is a big damn deal. Big deal. And I know that my mom and your mom are saying
Huge
hell yes
fans.
to that right now, as two huge Elvis fans.
Yes.
But his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, came to Dolly Parton and said, Elvis wants to record I Will Always Love You. Dolly is beside herself. Like, tells
So
all of her
excited.
people, calls her mom. I mean, she's like, Elvis is going to do amazing things. Well, I Will Always Love You. And so they invited her to the recording. So her song was going to be recorded by Elvis. B, she was going to get to meet Elvis. So she hadn't met him yet. And the night before, Colonel Tom Parker, I think that's how you say his name, the manager, calls and says, oh, by the way, Elvis doesn't record any song that he doesn't own all of, or at least half of, the rights to the song. And Dolly Parton was shattered.
Oh, I bet.
Shattered. And didn't sleep a wink, couldn't, she was just devastated. And she had a decision to make. And so she had to make the decision to tell Elvis no, which who on the earth in 1974 wants to tell Elvis that? And she quotes this. This is a quote from her that I pulled, and I love it. I love how she describes this. And she says to Colonel Tom Parker, I'm really sorry, and I cried all night. I mean, it was like the worst thing. It's like, oh my God, Elvis Presley. And all other people were saying is, you're nuts. It's Elvis Presley. I said, I can't do that. Something in my heart says, don't do that. And I just didn't do it. He would have killed that song. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so he didn't. And then when Whitney Houston's version came out, I made enough money to buy Graceland.
So
again, the ability to look a challenge in the face, have the courage to stand up, knowing her worth, knowing that song was the song special, because it was already a number one, but to have the confidence to say, this is for my
boundaries is what it was.
Yeah. I mean, she talks a lot about boundaries in the interview with Brene. And I just find that to be, think about the courage that it took to do that.
For a young woman, just trying to be successful.
When everyone around her was saying, you are crazy. Yeah. Don't make that call.
I
am. And I'm making this call. So and then another great example is that, and I think I mentioned it earlier, but her business, advisors told her, absolutely do not buy Dollywood. I think it was a poor decision. And I'm pretty sure she had a lot of people tell her to not continue with her acting career. Because once 9 to 5 in Still Magnolia, she found great success with those. But, some of the other ones weren't as chart topping. But they're still a big part of her success today, like the Rhinestones of the world. I mean, maybe Best Little Whorehouse wasn't a number one movie, but I can pretty much quote every line. It's iconic. And for a lot of reasons that probably aren't good today. But anyway.
Yes.
Back in the day, that's
what we had. That's what we watched.
Yeah, that's a whole nother topic for another day. Something I've learned from her and is to not go it alone. And while I've mentioned the people in her purview that have maybe advised her, to do things that she's strong enough to know when it's the right thing to do, but she's also a leader that has understood that it takes a lot of talented people to surround herself with that are smarter than her in all these other areas. She possesses the songwriting and the music gift and the business acumen and the self-confidence. All the other stuff she needs help with. And she doesn't shy away from that. And she's never been a type of, speaking of humility, if you listen to our previous episode, she understands how to earn the trust and learn to trust other people to help shape, her decisions and her career. And if you just think about it, she's 76 years old. There are very few 70-year-olds that can master social media and digital marketing like Dolly Parton. Now listen, she's lending her likeness and her relatability, but there are people all around the success of Dolly's digital and social that she's trusting, and she's humble enough to understand to let them guide her. And so when I just think about that is, she doesn't go it alone. And then along the same sides of that is that, she's a notorious collaborator. And Dolly has collaborated on many songs and many albums that you may know of, but she's just been a beacon to a lot of young artists and helped them catapult their careers. And, one of our favorites is Brandi Carlile. Yeah. And Brandy's one of them that she lent her hand to. And so Brandi Carlile, one of her most famous songs is The Story. And they decided to do a 10-year anniversary of that particular album. And Dolly was the first person she called. And Dolly said, yes, and I want to do The Story. Of course, Brandi Carlile is not going to say no. And if you love that song by Brandi Carlile, Dolly Parton's version is unbelievably unique and incredible. Wow. So just, I want to say that. But anyway, she's a collaborator and she believes in supporting other people. So she's not one of these diva stars that are in a boat alone. And I've watched it, I've seen it, and I've learned from it. I have also learned, she knows how to stay focused, but she also knows how to be very versatile. And I've spoke to that, again, numerous times, but, she never strayed from her God-given talent. And 3,000 songs later and writing every single day, she stays focused on her core gift. So, when I was thinking about starting a business where we were going to serve one industry, I thought about Dolly Parton, and I thought about it's okay to serve a niche audience. You can still be very successful doing, what we do here, which is marketing for one particular industry. But Dolly's also been brave enough to be versatile in expanding beyond just singing and songwriting, as we mentioned, into movies, into becoming an author, businesswoman, owning businesses and publishing companies, and the list goes on and on. And so that too, as we've shaped this company's direction, and in our 5-year plan is to expand into adjacent industries to include floral, restaurants, good for you foods, and philanthropy. As we've expanded, I thought about it's okay to keep your core business and your core focus, the thing that we are the best at, fresh produce marketing, and to use that knowledge to do good in other spaces. It doesn't take away from your core competency or the thing that brought you to the dance, in other words. The other interesting thing to note about Dolly Parton is if you Google net worth of female artist, musical artist, do you know, like, just guess, do you know where she hits on that list? If you guess, again, if you typed in
top 3, probably.
Top 3. Well, the answer 2 years ago was number 2.
Okay.
But now she's number 4, which makes total sense. Preceding her, only to precede her, is Rihanna. And Rihanna wasn't even in the top 10 2 or 3 years ago, but her beauty and makeup line, makes Rihanna sense. Taking a card from Dolly Parton and expanding beyond her incredible music catalog. So she's definitely has a net worth over $1 billion. Madonna was number 1. 2 or 3 years ago when I Googled this, and she's number 2 now. And then Celine Dion. And if you think about Celine Dion's incredible music catalog, but then her tremendous success in Vegas.
Right. Yeah.
And then Dolly's net worth is at $650 million. And while that in itself is incredible, only a third of that is her music.
Yeah, that's
only a third of that is her music. And so that just shows you the diversity of this incredible woman. I don't think a lot of people know that. And to think that she precedes people like Beyonce and Barbara Streisand.
Yes.
I mean, think of the biggest names in music.
Yes.
She precedes, like she's ahead of them in net worth. And doesn't show up
Miley
that way.
Cyrus or Carrie Underwood, like these giants that are actively performing right now. And
correct. Yes. And I mean, it's just, I don't know. It gives me so much more respect. And these are the type of things that I really wanted to share with our listeners as we look for inspiration for people who had the courage to be self-smarter and really, really step out.
Not even share. I'm sorry. I'm still stuck on that.
The statistic.
I mean,
we'll put the link in the show notes so that y'all can see the actual list of people, because it'll blow you away. Tina Turner.
Like, Britney Spears. Yeah, you keep mega stars.
Oh goodness, yeah. God bless Britney.
Save that one for another podcast.
That's a whole other podcast. We don't know if that's a self-smarter podcast, but we'll see. Open your heart and your mind. And one thing Dolly has never, ever been ashamed of or hidden is her devout faith. And she was raised in a very, again, you can Google the story, but she was raised in a Pentecostal church, a very specific religion. And because of that, Dolly struggled to relate to all aspects of that religion. So she has found herself more on what she describes in many places as being more spiritual. She definitely believes in God. She, and she has this incredible ability to share that with you without using it against you, no matter who you are or what you believe. And I love that. And I love that she can share her faith with her audience is so diverse. And by the way, what I didn't tell you in the timeline is in the 2000s, Dolly, once they quit playing her music on the radio, her touring slowed way down. And so in the 2000s, not in the late, in the 2000s, she wanted to see if she could get back on the touring schedule. So she did this, I don't know, it was like 15 shows of these really small venues, and Dallas was one of them, and it was called the Granada Theater. And I mean, it's still around, but I mean, I don't even know if that thing holds 200 people.
Maybe not. Maybe.
So I saw her there, and I hadn't seen her in years because she quit touring. And then I saw her at, for instance, the House of Blues in New Orleans was one of the other stops. Cool. And what she was trying to figure out was, am I still relevant? Can I play and the shows sold out.
Sure.
And then she was able to go, and the next time I saw her after that small tour that she did, she immediately followed up with a larger tour, and I saw her at American Airlines. And one thing that I noticed at these shows during the 2000s and beyond, and I still see it today, the diversity of her audience is incredible. Age, I mean, from little kids to people in their 80s and 90s and all in between, diversity in terms of race, diversity in terms of sexuality. And Dolly just opens her arms to all of us and our beliefs and meets us where we are without sacrificing who she is. Right. And I believe that, to me, embodies so much of what we need more of, and this open-mindedness without sacrificing what you believe.
Right.
And she has such an eloquent way of showing up, and I think that also leaves her extremely vulnerable. And she talks about with Brene on the podcast, she says, as a singer-songwriter and as a person, I have to leave myself wide open. I suffer a lot because I'm open so much. I hurt a lot. And when I hurt all over because I cannot harden my heart to protect myself. I always say that I strengthen the muscles around my heart, but I cannot harden it. And she's talking about something a little bit different in this context with Brene. But when I read that quote, it's in the songwriter book, I think about her opening her heart, and she can't be the person she is without it. Yeah. And she can't write the songs, and she can't show up for this diverse audience that, again, in 2005, she wrote a song for a movie about transgender, and she was nominated for an Academy Award for it. She received death threats because of that song. So the accolades in the music world were incredible. She did something she believed in, but counter to that, she received just enormous backlash in some instances, but she kept her heart open. Yeah. And she continues to lead with an open heart, even though at times it caused suffering and pain. So again, another lesson of, I coin it, open your heart and your mind, to the way others see the world. And I think that's incredibly important. Be human, humble, and humorous. I love alliteration. And she is so relatable. She says things about complex topics or about easy topics or about herself that are just so, she is probably one of the wittiest.
Oh, for sure.
Wicked smart when it comes to quick-witted, and the ability to see things through an honest lens that helps us see beyond our own short-sightedness is the only way I know how to say it. And, whether it was about her looks, it takes a lot of money to look this cheap. She's never shied away from, the topic of plastic surgery or any of these, or boobs. And she has, you can Google it. There's so many out there. And I know many of you know these, Dollyisms as they're called. One of my favorite relative to business, though, and she talks about this on Brene's podcast. By the way, Dolly Parton is a quintessential 2 on the Enneagram. She is definitely, when we talk about, and if you revisit that episode, 2s are the lovers and the helpers, and Dolly is quintessential in that. But one of my favorite business quotes is, she says, "I don't often lose my temper, but I'll use it if I have to."
Yeah, perfect for 2.
A self-aware 2, a self-smarter 2, right? Like, she's like, I don't want to use it. I want to show up and love you with my soft, open, muscular heart. But if I have to, I will show up. And that's why I really encourage you to listen to that interview with Brene, is because she really opens up about how difficult it is for her to make the difficult people decisions. And I just related to it so much sitting in this chair. And so, again, highly encourage that. The next thing is give your time, talents, and treasures with intention. And I believe that she found a way to do that, whether it's, again, through supporting the community that she grew up with. She didn't just leave an impoverished situation. When she could, she went back and made it better. And she gave the people that she grew up with, and most of her family still lives there. I've been to Dollywood twice. The year it opened, and again, I want to thank my parents for that, and was able to take my daughter for the 25th anniversary when she was, I forget how old Mackie was. But the year it opened, I remember driving in my mom's Cordova across the country to go to Dollywood. And, we saw many of her brothers and sisters and cousins performing on the stages at Dollywood. And I think about that, and I think about the other businesses she started in that area, and then the Imagination Library. She just wanted people in her community to not be illiterate. Right. And her community alone in that county, they turned it from a dropout rate in high school at 40% to less than 6%. Like, I'm talking impactful things, not just do good because it makes your heart feel good. Like, I'm talking about changing society for the better. And she starts with where she can make the most difference. And then because of the success, it then spreads. And so I love that she does use her time and talent and treasures intentionally. She received so much, she was one of the lead supporters when Nashville flooded years back. And she didn't just step up with her likeness and, she stepped up with her pocketbook. And I think most of us know too that she had a big hand in supporting the vaccine. She was one of the first celebrities to say, I'm going to give money. Now, what you may not know is that she has a deep relationship with Vanderbilt University for a number of reasons, but she wanted Vanderbilt to continue those efforts. And so she put money behind it. And she saw what COVID was doing to us and she wanted to support it. So again, her time is one thing, her talents are a whole another thing, but then her treasures being her success. Yeah. She does it very intentionally. And that's something that I've tried to emulate in the way that I've given back and to be a lot more intentional with those things. And then my favorite of all, and I think the thing that goes without saying is, Dolly is the epitome of to thine own self be true. And I have a quote on my wall in the office, and the team hears me use it a lot, and friends and family, but, find out who you are and do it on purpose. Mm-hmm. Dolly has done that. And she has literally, there's so many examples of it that we could be here for another 10 hours of really backing that up. But one example, and I know I recently shared this with you and when we were going through this list, I think you brought it up, but in 1989, which was one of the last years her White Limousine album, at the end of her album, she did a Christian song, which was very typical of a lot of country artists to include a Christian song at the end of their albums or their shows. And so that goes back to the roots of the Grand Ole Opry, and there's a lot of history there. But she included the song He's Alive. Well, she had a chart-topping song from White Limousine and was asked to come on to it was either the ACMs or the CMAs. It was probably the ACMs because it was in the spring. And it was the award show was on Easter weekend. And so instead of doing her chart, the song that was on the charts at the time, she chose to do He's Alive. And if you we'll put the link to the performance. And I love to share this on Easter. And there was special this particular weekend because it was both Passover and Easter weekend. And she comes out and she sings this song to this audience and to this television audience on Easter weekend. She chooses to sing He's Alive because in her heart, that's what was true to her in that moment, not necessarily the success of the song. Right. And she performs the song, which is a very difficult song to perform. And then at the very end, 100-piece choir backs her up. And it's one of the most beautiful performances, besides the live performances I've seen, of her on record. And it's just, there's something spiritual about it, and it pans to the audience and you can see all the 80s hairdos, the Judds and the big hair. But to think that she made that choice, that says so much. Like, she was being true to herself. Mm-hmm. And kudos to the award show for allowing her to do it, which I don't know that you could say no to Dolly. Yeah. At that point in time, she's kind of hard to say no to these days, and definitely not now. But that was when she was starting to transcend into legendary status and be able to use her, again, her true self to do something she believed in. And that's just one of the great examples of to thine own self be true. So I'm sure I could come up with 50 others, but, I think these are some great lessons we can all take away and continue, to learn from them. And she's going to be around and we can continue to learn from her. So
yes, we can. Thank you so much. I didn't know a lot of those things. Again, walking encyclopedia.
And, I think the facts are one thing, but, being able to glean things from her just by her example, I think is important. And I hope that that's something that we can continue to do on this podcast, is to find other examples like that. And and if you have ideas, listeners, on people you'd like us to go a deep dive on, or if you're interested yourself, we're definitely open to people that we should be exploring,
from a leadership standpoint.
A leadership standpoint that are just smarter.
That's right.
Whether they were always that way or not.
Right.
So Yeah.
Well, this whole podcast has been one big music moment, but, and I do want to ask you this question because I think this is very important. You've never met Dolly. I think people are probably wondering, has she ever met Dolly?
No, I get asked that question a lot. And I think people, when they hear the answer, they're like sad.
Yeah.
They're sad for me. And I'm not, because I haven't physically met her, but I know her. I might not know every aspect about her, but I know enough about her to feel so connected to her that
you don't need it.
I don't need it. Would I love to meet her? I think so. But then again, what would I say? I think I'd be a black. I mean,
I know we've talked about this a lot.
a lot. And Brene opens up with, "You're not supposed to meet your heroes." And she's like, "But if there's one hero you want to meet," and one of Brene's is Dolly Parton, she's like, "This is the hero you want to meet." And so with that being said, and the way Brandy talks about Dolly and, Miley and all these people, all these artists, and I do know people, like common people like us, that have met her and said she's exactly who you would think she is. And just kind and down to earth. I get stories all the time of people that have met her. And so, but no, I haven't met her yet, but that's okay. I don't feel sad about it.
Are we going to meet her?
I don't know if it's meant to be, it will happen. And I put that out into the universe. And if it does, I'll embrace it with open arms and hopefully not get arrested.
Well, me either, because I guess I'll be with you.
I hope so.
That is so funny. So Dolly, if you're listening, I mean, like as if, but yay, Dolly, thank you for listening.
Yes.
We need to get you in touch with this Danelle because she is a huge fan and I think y'all have a lot in common.
Dude.
And we could have one great conversation and maybe a glass of wine. Does she drink wine?
I don't know. Never heard Dolly talk about. I know what she likes to eat, but I've never heard her talk about wine.
What does she like to eat?
Like good food, like
fried
comfort food.
chicken?
No, she told me she says on the podcast, "I'll just eat. If I could eat potatoes every day, I would."
All right.
And she loves potatoes and home cooked, country cooking.
Who doesn't?
Comfort food. Yeah.
So good.
She's a Southern gal.
So just to round out our music moment, tell us a little bit about seeing her. You haven't met her, but how many times and what and how?
Yeah, I can't count the times that I've seen Dolly Parton. It started because of this affinity that was born in me.
Like really, you cannot
at 8 years.
count?
No, I can't. I couldn't even tell you.
Because there's so many.
There's so many, and what I want people to know about that is that is not a statement coming from, that's not a brag statement.
Yeah.
It's most of the times I've seen Dolly Parton in concert, I didn't buy the concert tickets. Like it was a gift. And that started when I was young. And so becoming a huge fan at 8 years old, I think the first time I seen Dolly Parton was at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo with Kenny Rogers. So when on that tour, and saw that tour several times. I remember in high school, one of my best friends, her and her mom bought me tickets to see Dolly Parton at Six Flags. And what was so sweet about that is the tickets were really good, and probably was the closest I was ever going to get to see her. Like, I don't know, I'm making it up, but maybe it was 10th row. I don't remember because I'd not had great seats seeing her up to that, but I didn't care.
Right.
As long as I was in the same building.
Right.
And then her purse got stolen the week before the concert. And so then my friend.
Yeah. Oh.
And then the mom went and bought us tickets, but there was only high up nosebleed left, but we still went. But my friend went and told a security officer what had happened. And sure enough, those two seats were empty because the person who stole the purse wasn't going to go see Dolly Parton. They just wanted the wallet. And he literally let me go down there. He escorted me to that seat and let me sit there for 3 songs. So that's one of those moments. Again, I have so many moments of, yes, I've definitely taken myself to a lot of, and others. I've never gone to a Dolly concert alone. So it's something that I love to do with people. But one of my greatest memories, and if you're watching on YouTube, you can see this beautiful picture of Dolly, and that's a picture that we took from the front row. But when she was doing American Airlines, the show after I'd mentioned after the small venue tour, my friends went together and they convinced the owner of our company at the time to give the suite, which was not hard to convince. Jay and Ruthie, of course, did that. Mm-hmm. And so we had the suite, but then what I didn't know is my dear friend Melinda bought 2 front row tickets, and so I stayed on the front row, and then my friends would take turns coming down. And so that picture is literally one that we took from that incredible concert. And what I also love about that story is the next day we got on an airplane and went to Caesar's Palace and saw her again the very next night. So I have all these amazing memories, but I have two that stand out the most is that in 1999, Dolly was inducted in the Country Music Hall of Fame. And my friend found a way to get me tickets to the CMA Awards.
That's amazing.
I mean, the CMA Awards. I mean, I'm sitting there and there's Travis Tritt, like there's these country artists. And so we're on the floor. It was just, again, how she was able to do these things. I don't ask. I just know that I showed up, and it was a special moment for my family because, my parents were there and Drew was there. So it was just an incredible moment. And what I didn't know is that was in 1999 and I didn't feel so well. And what I didn't know is that I was pregnant with Mackie Payton. So that has so many special memories in so many ways. And she also sung on that particular award show. So I got to see that. And then the last concert that I went to before COVID hit, so it was in October of 1999, was Dolly's 50-year anniversary of her being inducted into the Grand Ole Opry. So I got to see her at the Grand Ole Opry celebrating her 50th year of being part of the Grand Ole Opry, which... And let me tell you, those seats were really good. And so I was a little too close. So I didn't meet her, but boy, I could almost feel her breath. So those were, and to think
Do you make eyes at her? Have you guys ever made an eye connection?
Yeah, for sure. Like if you look at that picture, she's looking at me, like on the first row. Like she's looked deep into my eyes. So we haven't had a conversation, but we definitely know each other. So, thank you for asking that, because I love to tell those stories, because again, it's more of a reflection of the people in my life that, have created those incredible experiences for me just out of love and their genuine love that I love Dolly so much. So it says a lot about the people in my life. So yeah,
it does. And supporting your passion.
And think about how many times y'all have, just as a team, donated to something that Dolly was doing, or bought me gifts. I mean, you bought me wigs, you bought me all kinds of Dolly paraphernalia.
I have, yes.
I should have wore that today. That would have been great.
Oh my gosh, that would have been perfect.
Anyway, I just want to say, as we wrap this episode, I know you will do some closing, but thanks to our listeners. If you've made it this far on the Dolly train, I've been wanting to have this conversation, and not that it's been much of a conversation, but wanted to share this story for a long time. So thanks if you're still listening.
Yes. And if you're interested in some of the links and sources for some of the things that Danelle's been sharing about Dolly, be sure to check the show notes. We'll also have a list in there of the lessons that Danelle's taken away over the years, just for easy access for you. And then of course, be sure to visit the website if there's anything further that, we've got other episodes of our podcast there too. So you can explore. We love it when you support us with reviews. We ask you to do that. If you're enjoying our podcast, it certainly helps us know what kind of content you're leaning into, and also helps us promote and tell others what we might be, adding to their lives. So thank you so much. We appreciate your time today. Thank you, Janelle, for sharing.
Yes.
And thank you, Dolly Parton.
Yes. Thank you, Dolly Parton.
We send you into the week with grateful hearts.
Amen. As always, you can connect with us on Instagram and Facebook at Self Smarter Podcast. You can also leave a rating or review if you enjoyed what you heard today. Not only does this mean so much to us, but it also helps other leaders and future leaders find our community. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us in becoming Self Smarter. This podcast is produced by Snacks Media, and music is from a free platform. Well, that is until Brandy Carlisle reaches out to us to write the original score for our podcast. Friends, have a great rest of your day.